Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. So before starting, I do want to give sincere appreciation and recognize that we are gathering today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and the Anishinaabe peoples. Myself, I come from Niagara, born and raised in Niagara, but the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples still reside today, work, play, and live with all of us. And I'm of Métis background myself. And my family actually comes from just over the Quebec border here up in the Maniwaki Gracefield area, and moved to Niagara many, many years ago and had me. But then here I am. But since taking this file on for the past year, it's been a real pleasure. Not only a learning experience personally with my family, but also with the many other families across the nations here in Canada. And as well, whether it be on reserve or urban off reserve, it's been an experience. In Niagara, we have a friendship center. Right next door, we have Six Nations. So we get the best of both worlds in the region in southwestern Ontario with both on and off reserve. And I appreciate a lot of the work that you folks are all doing, especially in urban areas, because you're sort of taking on a different scope of what they do on the reserve in terms of being in an urban area and the challenges that a lot of our Indigenous people in the urban areas do face. I do want to thank the co-chairs, both Jean-Francois Cote and Becky Sisakamus. Did I pronounce that right, Becky? Thank you. I practiced it all night. Kuffner. Again, it's a pleasure for me to be invited by both of you. And of course, with that, the warm welcome that you've given me. I do want to thank the elders and the staff, the volunteers, and all the regional coalitions for the exceptional, and I mean exceptional work that each and every one of you do each and every day. I do want to acknowledge the significant and instrumental work done by the National Urban Indigenous Coalition Council and the coalitions across the country to support Indigenous peoples living in urban areas. You continue each and every day to adapt and adjust your priorities in response to the realities facing urban Indigenous peoples. You put communities at the center of all you do. I commend your passion, your dedication, your commitment, the work that you do and you continue to do, your efforts, as well as I said, you care. Each and every one of you truly cares. You support the urban Indigenous population each and every day and the challenges that they all face. And there's something to be said about that. I often say that we all stand on a stage, whether from my side, it's a political stage or business, or the stages that you sit on representing organizations. And on that stage, we all have a power. And that power is to influence people in a positive way. And we can't underestimate that power and that ability that we do have to influence people in a positive way. And each and every one of you does that. And you should be proud of that. And we all should thank each other for doing just that. Indigenous Services Canada has a strong relationship with the National Urban Indigenous Coalition Council and regional coalitions across the country. I look forward to continuing to strengthen our relationships to better support urban Indigenous peoples and to better understand your vision for the future, your vision for the future, your strategic plans, co-developed with us as a partner to ensure that the action plans that are identified within your strategic plans become the programs that we move forward with together. Combined, your coalitions reach hundreds of thousands of people every single day, from coast to coast to coast. And I throw a fourth coast on there because I'm from Niagara, the fourth coast being the Great Lakes. And you advocate for the nearly 1 million Indigenous peoples who live in Canada's urban communities. Your coalitions are amplifying the voices of Indigenous peoples in urban centers, and collectively, and I underline and I bold that word, collectively, you are advancing the needs and rights of Indigenous peoples in areas such as health, housing, youth, education, recreation, language, justice, employment, economic development, culture, and community wellness. Lifestyle. You're giving, enhancing, expanding lifestyle. Your work is important because we all know, there are significant barriers to overcome. About 60% of the Indigenous population in Canada lives in urban communities. They have come to cities for many reasons. Some were born there. Others relocated to be closer to their family members, friends, and others that influence them on a daily basis, or to find employment opportunities. Others went to cities to access healthcare or education, or to find greater social and safety supports. Whatever their situation, the reality is that urbanized Indigenous peoples face complex and profound challenges. Issues such as poverty, housing, health, and access to culturally safe community supports are growing in both intensity and urgency with each passing day, month, year, even with the important work being done by the coalitions. As a result, the expectations of Indigenous organizations working in the urban space has shifted. There is a critical need for increased program funding based on the established strategic plans that you are putting in place. And there is a need for greater flexibility to design, implement, and deliver solutions to support the needs of clients, of our neighbors, of our friends, of our communities. The National Urban Indigenous Coalition Council and coalitions across the country play an important role as leaders in supporting the urban Indigenous population on a daily basis. Our collaboration is essential. There's that word again, collaboration, collective, partnership. Essential so that together we can develop a responsive programs that addresses the needs of urban Indigenous peoples. We are committed to continue supporting the Urban Programming for Indigenous Peoples Initiative, which supports First Nations, Inuit, and Métis living in or transitioning to urban centers. This past summer, the Government of Canada announced it is providing more than $100 million over 3 years, starting in 2022-2023, to continue supporting the Urban Programming for Indigenous Peoples program. This includes $71 million to renew existing funding, $25 million over 3 years to expand this funding, and finally, $5 million over 3 years for research and data collection to better understand the realities of Indigenous peoples living in urban centers. All the while, the existing funding of $27.5 million in ongoing annual grants, as well as contributions, funding that goes to you. This funding continues to support the positive impact of this initiative. I would like to acknowledge the important role that the National Urban Indigenous Coalition Council and regional coalitions will play in framing, establishing, and participating in the program evaluation for the urban programming for Indigenous peoples. Renewed funding is a step in the right direction. However, we know more needs to be done. We recognize more needs to be done to make sure coalitions have what you need to serve urban Indigenous peoples. That's why we have committed to a review of the Urban Programming for Indigenous Peoples Initiative. The review will support and be supported by key program partners such as your National Urban Indigenous Coalition Council and coalitions individually themselves. It will examine the activities urban programming for Indigenous peoples have to help launch since its inception in 2016 and 17. In doing so, this review has several aims, several actions to understand the relevancy, the effectiveness, and efficiency of the program, to assess the extent to which the program recognizes and supports the rights, the autonomy, worldviews, and cultural heritage of Indigenous peoples, to consider how or whether the program meets community needs and goals, and to identify lessons learned and good, sound practices. Indigenous Services Canada has established a technical advisory committee that will help to design the framework of the evaluation so that it is viewed appropriately through an Indigenous lens, and that it in fact addresses the needs of key program partners. We are pleased the National Urban Indigenous Coalition Council and select coalitions are part of the Technical Advisory Committee that recently had their initial meeting in January of 2023. Designing this process is the way we move forward. And by doing it in this way, the urban programming for Indigenous peoples evaluation away from traditional Western evaluation models will be geared and work toward Indigenous methodologies of success. And in doing so, outcomes are community defined, and they exist within the context of relationships and communal values. This dedicated work by key partners, once again, by you, each and every one of you, working together and working with ISK. The key partners with the evaluation team is an important and necessary step to review the urban programming for Indigenous peoples program and to better inform next steps for Indigenous peoples living in urban centers. Establishing strategic plans that identifies deliverables. Those deliverables, of course, are attached to expected outcomes. The most important part is attaching action plans to those deliverables. That's the key. And once those action plans are established, those programs and programming as part of those action plans are established, the most important part is then to execute. And quite frankly, get the job done. I have to say this in conclusion. Once again, I do want to give you my sincere appreciation and my personal commitment, and that on behalf of the minister, that we're here to work with you. I want to thank you for inviting me here to join you today to say a few words and hopefully to strengthen that relationship personally. And I'll close by saying that we know that the needs and the challenges faced by Indigenous peoples in urban centers are unique and growing with the population. And we know Indigenous organizations provide essential services and play an important role in supporting Indigenous peoples who are living in or transitioning to urban centers. That includes seniors. It includes women, families, youth, the unhoused, and people who are struggling with health and addiction issues. I would like to thank all of you for your work and for your commitment to continuing to work together. Miigwech, merci, thank you, and merci.
I want to thank you, Minister.
No, not yet.
I almost gave you a promotion. Excuse me, Parliamentary Secretary Badawey, thank you so much. Wondering if you are open to a couple of questions.
Absolutely.
Okay, certainly. Do we have questions from the floor? Dawn?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. My first question is, co-development was promised by Minister Mark Miller and then again by Minister Hadju. Why is this not happening? And what is the reset? What is the political will to reset the process of co-developing?
Political will is quite strong. Mr. Haidu, right now, this time of year, is fighting quite hard on your behalf for the urban Indigenous organizations throughout the country to not only get more budget money in place for you to actually satisfy the co-development. It's like I said earlier, establishing those strategic plans, attaching actions to them, and moving forward with those action plans, mostly programming, a little bit of capital. Capital's there, but it's more important is the programming. And we're here with you, shoulder to shoulder, but it takes those resources. And I'll tell you, in talking to the minister just before we left 2 weeks ago to get back to our constituencies, she was adamant that she'll be going to the cabinet, Minister of Finance as well, obviously, in this year's budget, to ask for those extended dollars to actually co-develop the plans that you're putting forward, which I would only expect includes a lot of the programming that would actually be injected in the different areas throughout the country. And they're all different.
Yeah.
No area is the same. It's not a cookie cutter approach. We understand that. But as we get those desires, those plans, and with that, the programming that goes along with it, two things we have an ability to do. One is to go to cabinet and ask for direct dollars that come and flow through ISK. But equally as important is to look for dollars that are within other ministries. It could be infrastructure, it could be health, it could be working with the provinces and the territories, education, other health related programming. And when I say health, I don't just mean the obvious, where you get a cut, a bruise, a broken bone. It could be critical, whether it's a heart, whether it's neuro, whether it's stroke, but also preventative health. Having the availability, for example, of endocrinologists in communities so they can look after folks that are battling diabetes, dietitians, good, healthy living, being proactive, recreation, fun, getting people off the streets, housing, and things of that nature. So it's a three-pronged approach. It's one, understanding the strategic plans that you're presenting to us. Two, going to finance and cabinet with a budgetary ask directly for ISK that attach to these different programs and action plans that you're going to identify. And lastly is for us to facilitate on your behalf further resources, support from other ministries that would align with those strategic plans that you're presenting to us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
I can stay here all afternoon. Yes. You got it the whole time.
Stephen and I.
Yes.
Parliamentary Secretary Badawey, I want to compliment you. Your remarks suggested to me that you're well prepared to speak to us. My question was to be focused on a statement made by Minister Haidu, and I am from Thunder Bay, by the way, about her announcement of the renewal of UPIP and the funding that went with that. But today, of course, most of us are interested would come after that was completed. Am I correct in thinking that?
That's the ask.
Hmm.
And when I say that's the ask, and I'll be blunt, you have every minister who's very passionate about their file. And I'll say that Minister Haidu is probably one of the most passionate about her files. And she is going to bat to attempt to ensure, based on her ask the cabinet and the Minister of Finance in this year's budget and future budgets, to get those dollars for you. I see it. And if I can just digress for a second, you know, I'm a former mayor. I was a mayor for 14 years and had a family business, fourth generation. And for me being here today as a member of Parliament, parliamentary secretary, it's not about the politics. It's not about the partisanship. It's about getting the job done. It's about rolling up the sleeves and working with our partners to get the job done. And as a former mayor, one of the things that I learned, and I was young when I was elected as a mayor in my 20s, one of the first things I learned, two things. One was, you don't do it alone, you do it together. And when you do it together today, you live together forever. That's important. That's the residual benefit of accomplishing things. Doing it together, you live together forever as community. And the second part of that, and to achieve that, you have to have a disciplined approach, a disciplined structure by way of establishing that strategy, deliverables, actions, and execute. And frankly, that's our intent, is to be shoulder to shoulder with you, to accept those strategic plans, recognize those deliverables, help you attach those action plans to it. And the most important part is work on your behalf and advocate on your behalf to execute. So yes, the expectation is that the minister is going to go to both cabinet as well as to the finance to advocate on your behalf to get those dollars to be enhanced from that program.
Thank you.
Perhaps we'll take one more question from the floor and then one question from the Zoom. Sally, I see that you're have your hand up there. So one more question from the floor and then Sally in the Zoom while we have the parliamentary secretary here.
Welcome.
Hi, Sally.
I'm Katrina.
Oh, Sally's over here. And who are you?
My name is Katrina.
Katrina. Hi, Katrina.
Kirkwa Philpotts.
Pleasure.
I'm here representing the Victorian Native Friendship Center as well. I'm originally from the Kiva Lake region of Nunavut. And so
We'll be up there in 2 weeks in that area.
I can't where to go, but I'll
Can you give me some
welcome you
advice where
here.
to go? What's the best restaurant?
Talk to Tanya. She's on my, and so I'm also here representing the urban Inuit of BC. So I have a question here on behalf of everyone. How do you, I think an extension of your comment from earlier, but maybe a little more detail.
Mhm.
How do you view the role of coalitions contributing to short and long-term solutions regarding urban Indigenous challenges?
Establishing strategy. That's the first layer is working together.
Mhm.
And as I said earlier, you know, it's all about community. It's part the politics, part the partisanship. It's all about community, neighbors, friends, families. And taking all that in, recognizing the needs, having that empathy so that no one's left behind. So the first layer is the how to the what. So we understand what the what is. Each and every one of you understands what the what is, what those needs are. You understand that. Now it's attaching, how do we address those needs? So it's recognizing, and the second layer is the strategy, the how. And then again, attached to that strategy, each individual priority that you establish within those strategies.
Okay.
And then attached to those priorities, the action plans.
Okay. I can definitely see how the Friendship Center can positively do that to ask how. However, from the urban Inuit from the West Coast,
Mhm.
we don't know who we are. We don't know, we haven't come together. So I guess before we can even develop a strategic plan, what do you tell the urban Indigenous people that haven't been able to come together to
Mhm.
congregate, to understand our identity. On the West Coast, the
Mhm.
farthest West Coast Inuit organization is in Edmonton.
Mhm. Bring them together. And by the way, I'm just a phone call away. And
Okay,
I'm more than happy.
I'll talk to you on Monday.
If my calls, I love traveling and seeing in the communities, really getting to know you. And the whip doesn't often let me get out when we're sitting, but on my off weeks, like this week, for example, I make a point of asking my staff to get me out. Hence the reason why I appreciate being here. But as I said earlier, it's all about that recognition, working to co-developing. You know more than we do. We're the resource, we're the mechanism. And we're going to advocate on your behalf. Like I have the Fort Erie Friendship Center in my, well, she's not running now, but after the redistribution, she's now in my, I say they. I say she because Jen Dockstetter is she's the boss. And she makes it very well known. And she lets us know exactly what her needs are. But the one preface she always states before she talks about Fort Erie Native Center and what happens in Niagara and the Niagara Native Center as well, is that we're different than other Native centers. We're all different. And you just made that point, is recognizing who you are, who your community is, and then therefore what those needs are. And that then is passed on to us. And I'll tell you, it gives us the ability not just to work within our confines of ISK, but to work within our confines of both the government, but more importantly, the House of Commons. Because it's not a partisan issue. It's a national, bipartisan, and bicameral, which means both the House and the Senate issues. And we have to work together regardless of party or house to ensure that we're both advocating, but then past the advocation is that we're actually executing
Mhm.
based on the desires and the action plans that you're establishing within your strategic plans.
Thank you, Matna.
Oh, sorry.
Wait, Sally, you can go ahead with your question, please.
Miigwech.
That's how
Well, welcome. I'm actually quite impressed that you're a Métis. I also am Woodlands Métis. I am currently here supporting the North Bay Coalition, which is one of the new coalitions. I reside in Thunder Bay, and I actually know Patty Haidu. I work for the Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services, and we are doing a project with Jen Dockstetter up in the Fort Erie. So I really do want your phone number. And you'll see I'm
214948.
you have to
It's
start that again.
all the time.
One of those, somebody will get it to me. I didn't catch it fast enough. And I actually have more than one question.
Sure.
For me, some of the issues that we have is we are very diverse across the country. We are all at different stages of our development and the development of our coalitions. And so one of the things when we talk about having a strategy and having an action plan, we're well aware that this is required. Some of us call it a business case to move things forward. But will there be supports, capacity building supports and supports for us to help develop those community strategies, because every community is different. And then with that, having to understand to have a national strategy when we are all at such diverse positions and have such unique priorities or diverse priorities in each community is a struggle. I often think that, Canada doesn't have one party. And if you had to make all of the Canadians decide, or even all of the politicians to decide on one strategy, how far would we get? Right? So that's my perspective that I come from. And so then I throw out at you is what are the timelines that are required for this? And then my next question would be, I'm thankful to hear that Minister Haidu and she's going to do an interministerial, because this is not just a one ministry responsibility. I jokingly said earlier, if they're called Indigenous services, it should include the whole holistic perspective, not just from an Indigenous on reserve or off reserve perspective, because we're justice, we're health, we're child and youth, we're seniors, we're culture. It's very diverse. So it's good to hear that there's the potential from an interministerial approach, whether ISK, is the one that leads that. The other thing to let you know is I work for the Ontario Aboriginal Housing, and we are also part of a national coalition. I'm going to assume that you know something about that. My question would then come down to is the allocation, the Treasury Board request. What's the timelines for that, and what would be the expectation? Because our expectation for co-development would be that we would be engaged with that co-development, and we would expect that the ask would be significant through multiple interest in ministries, not just ISK.
Well, I have to say, I was elected in 2015, and every time I sat in the podium and in front of a microphone, I was able to answer a whole bunch of questions off the top of my head. I actually had to write all that down now, so so I can actually hit every question that you asked. So, but I'll say this: great questions, and you know, I guess from the first question that you asked, it's a simple answer: yes. You know, we're committed, and as I said earlier, the minister, myself, and I'll say the government in general is committed to the Indigenous file altogether. But when we break it down, obviously, you know, frankly, it's bigger than the country. When we look at the needs on and reserve and off reserve, we're trying to fix over 200 years of wrong quickly. And it's hard. Like when the Prime Minister tapped me on this last December, well, a year December, I'm just coming up on a year and a few months. You know, I learned one of the first things that hit me right in the forehead was how big this is. You know, over 200 years, way over 200 years of bad, we're trying to make good on. And it's a tall order, especially financially. It's bigger than the country. You know, and I can go on and list everything and why that is. But you know something, Sally, we're trying to chip away at it, and we're trying to be very strategic, and it's sometimes worse first, and both on and off reserve. And the allocations that we're expecting, frankly, are very disciplined with respect to what we're being asked for, and more importantly, why. And then it's up to us to try to create that balance, to take the pie and make it bigger, although it's only this big, and cut it in so many slices in terms of what goes where based on those priorities. Having said that, however, and you raise a good point of interest, is the partners. And not just the partners within government with respect to the different ministries, whether it be health, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be economic development, whether it be ISK, or whether it be Crown Relations, finance, and the many different departments, all of which, quite frankly, are involved and or have a part to play in what we're trying to do. But let's not dismiss the other partners, like the provinces and the territories and the municipalities. Sometimes we have to bring in kicking and dragging. You know, like I know when I was a mayor, I worked very closely with and even it wasn't even my city. I was the mayor of Port Colborne. Fort Erie is my neighbor, but we still, as a region, work together with the native centers in Niagara because of how important it is. So it's a multi-level of government approach. Municipalities, in some places, if they have 2-tier regions, counties, provinces, territories, federal government, and of course, all of you working together. But when it comes to the mechanisms, when it comes to the actual resources, yes, we do shoulder the responsibility to try to facilitate all those partners, whether it be intergovernmental within each individual government, level of government, or working together as different governments in that manner of intergovernmental. Province working with the feds, working with the regions, counties, municipalities, and of course the different NGOs, different organizations. But it goes back to what I said earlier. It's imperative that we work together. It's imperative that we co-develop. This is you. This is your communities. We're the mechanism. We're the tools in the toolbox. We all know how frustrating it is when you go in the garage and you want to fix something, you can't find that tool in the toolbox. All we're trying to do is fill up that toolbox so that when you do open that drawer, it's there. And that's what we're trying to do in facilitating those partnerships based on your strategies with all levels of government and all organizations including, of course, different ministries that are contained within the federal government. Did I answer them, Sally? Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for the questions.
Thanks for the
She wants one-
question.
She wants one more. You're on mute, Sally.
Sorry, I just took myself off. Just to let you know, I want a power tool. I don't want a screwdriver. Okay, we're gonna get with the towns.
Bravo, bravo. You got it. You got it.
Oh, that was a good one, Sally. Thank you so much for your question. I appreciate your time. One more question from the floor.
Absolutely.
One more question from the floor, Justin.
For joining us here today. I appreciated your comments in support of the importance of local action plans for urban Indigenous communities across the province. And I appreciated your advice to Katrina earlier about the importance of convening people together in local communities to determine what are the priorities, what are the actions that need to be taken, who's responsible for what, and developing a plan to get there. It just so happens that in St. John's, First Voice Urban Indigenous Coalition, which I'm here representing today, has done exactly that. We've produced an action plan here called Our Shared Vision, A Path Toward Truth and Reconciliation in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. It sets out 42 specific calls for change across a wide variety of domains, including housing, homelessness, education, justice, policing, and a variety of other things. The goals that we've selected to include in the plan are very ambitious. It includes things like strengthening police oversight within the province. So beyond the scope of St. John's, redeveloping the K-12 curriculum, which is far outdated, and challenging systemic racism within a variety of provincial institutions. The plan has the support of local elected officials, including the City of St. John's, who were actively engaged in developing the plan. There are a variety of representatives from provincial government departments that were also engaged in developing the plan. It has broad community support. So where I'm going with my question here is we've developed the plan, we've shared it with the department. Current and existing funding allows for one full-time position. So my question is, how is one full-time person expected to redevelop the K-12 curriculum and homelessness for the Indigenous community in St. John's, lower incarceration rates among Indigenous peoples, and a variety of other 42 actions here? So that's my question for you.
Great question, and they can't, frankly. And, you know, I'll give an example. The Fort Erie Friendship Center, and this is another great deal of appreciation I have to give all you folks, because being an urban, I'm not sure most, I can't answer that question. I'll say some, because I have recognized some, not only provide services for Indigenous people in urban centers, but at times they actually offer services for the entire community. I know, for example, Jen Dockstader with the Fort Erie Friendship Center actually offers services for the broader community when it comes to early learning and childcare, and really takes that roster down in that jurisdiction based on their participation. So it's imperative that we bring everyone to the table and we start establishing, again, the action to the priorities that has the participation of all the partners, including the federal government, primarily, but also the provinces, the territories, the municipalities. And having that facilitation happen, and therefore an ability for you to hire 3 or 4 people. It could be a partnership. You can share people, which I know a lot of organizations do, whether it's urban or not, depending, or Indigenous or not, depending on who or what that program may in fact be. But I'll ask you for 3 things. 1, I'd love to see a copy of that. 2, I'd like to follow up with a call or a meeting to really get down a bit more granular on some of the answers that you're looking for. And finally, to look at any other individuals, levels of government, partners that we actually can bring into the conversation to help you advance that ball down the field closer to the goal line. Okay. Like I said to you guys, I'm a phone call away. I'm a phone call away. And so is Patty, Minister Haidu. So by all means, and we got a great team. Believe me, we have a fantastic team over at ISK and overall within the government. So just call.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for extending your time here with us and giving us your information for follow-up and contact. So
No problem.
thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you also to our delegates. Thank you also to the delegates from the floor and in the Zoom for the questions that were posed. It was really good information and good conversation. So
Thank you.
thanks so much. And we'll take a break for 15 minutes.